It started out just like any other day, and late in the afternoon, there was a wildfire reported northeast of town. It was a small fire. It was near our transfer station, so near our dump, our landfill. But it was close to some transmission lines in a forested area right beside the highway. That obviously was actioned right away by the Parks Canada Initial Attack Crew as well as the Jasper Fire Department. And then while they were on scene dealing with this, another fire was reported south of town. And then within minutes, 2 more fires south of town. But I'm going to back up a little bit, just a little bit of history before we get into the details. But I'm actually from Calgary, born and raised here, just down across the river from this spot here. I spent a lot of time just down the hallway here, what we used to call Denny's Den. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with that location, but I moved to Jasper in the early winter of 1979. I was mainly a skier at the time, or I thought I was, so I moved to Jasper to ski. But I was also into nature and wildlife, hiking and camping and whatnot. And there's no better place than Jasper to kind of seek that type of lifestyle. So 46 years later, with a full career in emergency services and public service, I retired, and now I'm busier than I ever was. Now I've got 6 jobs instead of the one I used to have. So in my retirement, I've done a few things. I've traveled across the Arctic on a bicycle. I became a marriage commissioner, so I marry people. In fact, 2 days before the evacuation in Jasper, I was doing a wedding up on Edna's Knoll, which is across from Jasper Lake, way up on the side of the Sheep Mountain. And I remember remarking to the couple how hot and dry it was. It was 36 degrees that day, and the grass under our feet was crunching as we walked up the trail. I'm a hunting guide. A lot of people wouldn't know that, but every fall I go out in the woods with American tourists and we archery hunt for moose. I'm president of the local legion, proud to say that. It's quite an organization. And as you can see, I'm one of the very few people that has ever ridden a bicycle to Tuktoyaktuk in the winter. So I'm going to back up just a little bit behind the Jasper event of 2024. In 2022, we also had a fire in Jasper. We called it the Tighem fire. It was quite significant impact to the town of Jasper, although the fire never actually reached the town. Because what happened was the fire breached the transmission lines coming into Jasper. And Jasper historically had its own power source. So Jasper always had its own power plant. Up until about 2019, we switched onto the grid. And unfortunately, when the Tighem fire burnt northeast of Jasper, it took out a number of those transmission poles, and we lost power to the town. ATCO is our power provider. They immediately activated their incident command center, and they focused first on critical infrastructure and then on backup generation to support the town. But as you can imagine, a tourist town with 25,000 people in it, all of a sudden there's no power. It's kind of difficult to offer the services that people expect. The wildfire was ignited on September 1st of 2022, and it burnt just over 6,000 hectares. There was about 100 firefighters and approximately 5 helicopters on that fire. So just to put it into perspective to the one in 2024. And there was lots of lessons learned from that one as well, so that were applied more recently. So I'm proud to have served the community for 22 years as the Director of Protective Services, and in my time, I did a lot of planning, did a lot of relation building and team building, operated the fire department, the emergency measures department. Part of my duties was preparedness, obviously, and building relationships was always kind of in the forefront of my theme, because I always thought if you get along with everybody, whether it's an emergency or not an emergency, you're going to operate better together. If you don't get along, then you've got another hurdle to jump over, and especially during an emergency. So I spent a career of building relationships, and I think, although I was retired at the time, I think it paid off in spades last summer. We work together quite strongly with Parks Canada, obviously, because it's a dual jurisdiction area. We're in a national park, so we had a lot of plans that were called dual plans. So when I wrote the evacuation plan probably 10 times, and the last two we actually involved Parks Canada 50-50, so that we were looking at the big picture, not just the town site. The same with the emergency management plan and a few other plans. But the other thing we did is regular exercises and training. So annually we would train with our agencies, and annually we would do these scenario exercises and involve different levels of government and whatnot. The other thing we worked on was the incident command system. Over my career, we trained over 40 people in my department on ICS. And then we started training with Parks Canada, and every time we did an exercise, we used the ICS system, which again is something that proved to be very beneficial during our event. We are in a national park, so it's federal jurisdiction, but we do fall under provincial framework when it comes to emergency management. So we do fall under the Emergency Management Act of province, the local authorities' emergency management regulations. And we do have our own emergency management bylaws, our municipal bylaws. From that, then we have resources. We have access to the Alberta Emergency Management Agency and the provincial resources with the structural protection program and things like that. So Jasper is a municipality within a national park, so it is a little more complicated when it comes to a major emergency, when you're dealing with, different levels of government. But just the fact that we had worked so much together in the past, it really benefited the event. So some of the plans, basically, we are required by provincial bylaw or by provincial regulation to have the emergency management bylaw, which included that joint evacuation plan with parks. And then another thing we had was a emergency social services plan, which is something a lot of people don't think about, but dealing with the people end of the event, and also animals and pets and elderly and disabled people. So we had a full plan dealing with that. One of the things that was identified after our event was that there was a need for a better, more robust reentry plan and a business continuity plan, which is something that's been worked on right now. The other thing we had was a tactical wildfire plan, and that's something that really paid off. Basically a plan that identifies sprinkler placement and resource placement, staging areas. The whole town is put into zones, and everything is pre-planned ahead of time. So when we know if there's a fire coming, we know where it's going to hit first, and we know what zone we're in, and we know what resources to apply to it. And then another thing that we've been working on for years is a wildfire mitigation strategy, and that's a fuel reduction plan that we work with Parks Canada. And I managed that for about 15 years, and we did do a lot of fuel removal, so a lot of logging, you might call it, or timber removal in the park over that time, and they're still doing it. One thing with plans too, I really stress, is a plan isn't something you write and put on the shelf. That's something that needs to be pulled off at least monthly and reviewed and then practiced and exercised. I rewrote the Jasper disaster plan 14 times in 22 years. So. And people are the big thing. Relationships, in my mind, are the key to any event or to any organization succeeding in an emergency. Relationships, they need to be established ahead of time, prior to the emergency. It's too late when the emergency hits to start trying to build relationships. You need to establish those ahead of time. At Jasper, we're fortunate to have some amazing, amazing people, and we worked hard and diligently together. So we had regular meetings. We had a spring session every year with the provincial people, regular Emergency Management Association meetings, so monthly. We had regular meetings with the power company, which is ATCO in our world, gas, which is ATCO, CN Railway, Kinder Morgan or Trans Mountain Pipeline. Lots of stakeholder engagement. It's a tourist town, so we reached out to the hospitality industry, the businesses. Like I said before, we had 30 plus of my staff that were trained in ICS up to 300 level, which is quite substantial. And then we branched into specific training, so ops chief and those kind of higher level training. Jasper is also a member of the All Hazards, it's the Northern Alberta All Hazards team, and so one of the benefits is that if there's an event anywhere in Northern Alberta, we get called in to assist. So it not only provides assistance to our neighbors, but it also provides experience to our staff. And one of the things I'm most proud of is we had very strong communication with our public, our residents. We had a very robust evacuation plan, and the people really knew what to expect. We basically made it clear numerous times throughout the year, any public event or anything, we were talking about evacuation and emergency planning. So our residents really were engaged. The ones I'm most proud about, though, is our fire department. They've been called heroes. They don't like that label, but what they went through the evening of the fire is beyond imagination. And a lot of them are younger, under 25. Like probably 8 of these people in this picture are under the age of 25, so they're quite young. And the other thing is that 9 of them lost their homes in the fire. So that's something else that when you're dealing with a big event and you watch your own home go down, that's pretty substantial loss. So right now there's about 28 volunteers. I call them volunteers, but they're actually unpaid professionals. They have the same, if not higher level of training than any other fire department. It's mandated by law and it's required. They do get paid an honorarium to an organization, but they do not get individual pay, which is a little bit unusual because most of the small towns are going to a paid on-call service where Jasper is still considered volunteer. But that word is kind of a misnomer. They're definitely paid professionals. We have full-time staff, so a fire chief, a deputy chief, 2 captains. We have an 8-person day crew, and that's a temporary thing that'll be ending at the end of this year. It was after the fire that was put into place. And then there's the Director of Protective Services. And I'll add that when I retired, I was the Director of Services and the Fire Chief. And we only had 1 captain and 1 deputy. So they've increased the roster substantially. Mostly what we do in Jasper is motor vehicle collisions, unfortunately. It's mostly highway calls. And we go into British Columbia as well as all throughout the park. We also do medical assists and mutual aid responses. More specific to the fire event that we had, there is required training for anybody in Alberta to be part of a structural protection crew. And in our case, we had to take the Wildland Urban Interface crew member training and the NFPA 1051 wildfire training. That's the minimum, and then you branch out into different other courses. So everybody that responds to a big event in Alberta has to have a minimum level of certification. And the equipment that you use and the resources have to be in sync with the rest of the province and within the guidelines. So the provincial government sets those standards. The other thing that's really important, and Jasper's really taken a lead on this, is FireSmart. As we all know, wildfires have become increasingly complex due to climate change and increased development in the forested areas. And really, when these big events happen, there is a lack of capacity for both the wildland and the structural fire crews. So FireSmart helps assist with stopping buildings from burning, and that's what it's all about. If buildings don't burn, we don't have a disaster. So in Jasper, we have 5 recognized neighborhoods. We have 9 certified technicians that do assessments. And we have 14 other neighborhoods that are actively engaged right now, and there's 7 more that will be registered this year. So basically what FireSmart is just a way of living with and managing the risk of wildfire. It's a shared responsibility between government, community leaders, and neighborhoods and residents. And really, in my mind, it starts at home. So this graphic you see here shows a house, And kind of the basic is that you want to do fuel reduction, or you want to remove combustibles close to a home or a structure. So you start at the building with preferably non-combustible building features, and then you work out to the 1.5 meters around the building, which should be no combustibles. And then from that, you go out to 10 meters, which is reduced combustibles and thinning and limbing vegetation. And then the extended zone, which goes out to 30, which most people don't have in their property, but that's, again, more thinning and reducing fuel load. And it's all about reducing fuel load, because when the fire comes in, it's the ember shower that hits the structures first. So if those embers can land on something combustible and lead to a home, that home will burn. There's no doubt about it. In the right conditions, that home's gone. And if you're in a subdivision or a town with multiple homes, then you end up with structure-to-structure ignition, and you end up with lots of homes burning. Okay, it's not advancing. For some reason, my slide's not advancing. Oh, there we go. This little guy here is a pine beetle. That little guy has taken a lot of blame over the years for a lot of things. It's basically a forest pest. It's a bark beetle. It infests, in this case, pine trees, and it kills them from the inside out. And when they die in a sort of a process of time, and during that time, the tree host becomes flammable or more combustible in different phases, to the point where it loses its needles and falls over, and then it's more of a ground problem than a tree problem, because it's on the ground. But the pine beetle was blamed for a lot of the damage in Jasper, when in fact the cycle of the pine beetle had long passed. The trees that were left were mostly gray or fallen. There was some areas where there were still red needles that are very volatile, but most cases they were just dead trees, either standing or laying on the ground. So as I mentioned, forest fuel reduction. So we've done an extensive amount of work around the park since '99, since I started, and that involves both mechanical thinning and prescribed burns. So when I talk about mechanical thinning, it's basically logging with rubber-tired logging machines. So no metal tracks to reduce the surface damage, and everything's done in the winter, again, to reduce the damage. So a lot of forest fuels were removed prior to the event. In fact, 6,000 hectares of extensive fuel management was undertaken, and more since. So in the last year, another 1,000 of forest fuel was reduced on the west side of town. So prior to the fire, we had almost 3 weeks of drought. So I mentioned I was at a wedding a few days before the evacuation, and it was in the mid-30s, and the grass was crunchy dry. It'd been like that for upwards of 3 weeks. So if you look at the visual here, back in 2021, that was the heat dome year, we reached our peak 41.2 Celsius. In July, just before our event, we were at 38 degrees. And the difference between those 2 years was the heat dome was a shorter cycle. It was only a week in Jasper, whereas this cycle was 3 weeks. So the forest was extremely, extremely dry. So on July 22nd, as I mentioned, there was a small fire northeast of town. It was right beside the highway, and it was actioned. But the winds were so that when they arrived on scene, the fire had spread substantially within minutes. And then it spread again and again. They actually had a helicopter bucketing it and couldn't even catch up to it. And then at the same time, they got the call for the fires down south. So there was various lightning strikes that afternoon. And one fire started about 35 kilometers south of town. And then 2 more within probably 10 minutes. This visual shows 2 of the south fires. And these fires grew to a tremendous size in a very short period of time. They redeployed the initial attack crew from the northeast fire on a helicopter right away almost. They were there within 15 minutes, and at that point it was already almost unmanageable. So incredible, incredible fire growth. So what happens then was the chief and the Parks Canada Wildland fire specialists got together and they said, you know, this is not good. We need to do something really serious here. So they called the Unified Command meeting and they decided on an evacuation order, an evacuation alert for the town of Jasper and Jasper National Park. So that's the order. It came out around, I think it was 9 o'clock at night. My daughter phoned me. I was working up in Grand Cache with Alberta Forestry. She told me what was happening, and I said, just get out. Just don't even worry about it. Just pack the car and go. So she was one of the first in line, but she still waited 3 hours to get out of the town. And the problem with the evacuation was, now it was a very good evacuation. It was done timely, it was done early, but they had to evacuate the South Highway first because all the tourists were there. All the campgrounds were full and all the hikers and recreators. And so all that traffic had to clear the intersection on the west end of town because there was only one way out. The other two were blocked. So as you can understand, a lot of people sat in traffic for a long time, but nobody was hurt. Everybody got out safely. And hats off to the town of Almont, who received about 20,000 people that night. Did an amazing job. So people did have to wait bumper to bumper for hours. Some people actually gave up, pulled their cars over and went back home and went to bed and got up in the morning. And some actually got to go east. There was a few times when they shuttled people east. So the next day, everybody was busy. Obviously, both structural and wildland fire crews worked to set up sprinklers, fire smarting properties. There were water tankers and helicopters there, but they were both ineffective due to the winds, and in the valley bottom, it was impossible to get an aircraft in there. The north fire, although it was still raging pretty good, wasn't that much of a concern because it was heading away from town, and it was also heading eventually to the fire from 2 years previous, so it was going into burnt territory, less fuel. So the day of impingement, we had close to 100 wildland firefighters in town, and basically they couldn't do anything because they can't fight the wildland fire. It's too big. So we put them to work, and they were removing combustibles from around every home in Jasper. It was a small army of yellow coverall firefighters that did a tremendous amount of work. They removed combustibles from around almost every home, particularly every one on the west end. Fire department deployed, we have on-house, we have a large sprinkler system that was deployed around the west end of town and fired up. It was running all day. And we also brought in a high-volume water supply system from an old well site on the river that had been self-designed when I was the chief. We had large manifolds and 24-inch pipe laid out that brought more water and a larger sprinkler system into the edge of town. But unfortunately, that one didn't actually get flowing until about 20 minutes before the fire hit, so it really didn't get a chance to do much. This is pictures at 3:30 in the afternoon of the night of the fire, and this is where I was deployed, was the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge. And this is what we saw looking south. And prior to that, like an hour before that, the sky was pretty much clear, but it just started getting really ugly around 3:30. And this is the fire approaching from the south. This is across from the Valley of Five Lakes, probably about 3 kilometers before Becker's Chalets, if you know where that is. And this is that same fire, just a close-up from the helicopter. And just kind of shows the intensity of what was coming to town. So around 3:30 again, a safety briefing was held at the fire hall. And at this point, it was decided that only structural firefighters could remain with proper PPE, so personal protective equipment. So most of those wildland firefighters were let go and sent back to Hinton to wait and see what happened. Also, all the ECC staff, park wardens, RCMP, anybody that wasn't basically a structural firefighter was evacuated. And then around 6 o'clock, maybe a little before 6, the column collapsed. And what that means is basically that large column that was being fed by the fire on the south, it came around the campground area, it lost a lot of the fuel that it was thriving on, and it collapsed. And when it did, it darkened the whole sky. It was like midnight in Jasper at 6 o'clock. and it sent a shower of embers and sparks. It was unbelievable. One person described it as an upside-down fireworks show, because the fireworks were coming from the sky and landing on the ground. So this street, this is a shot what it looked like early in the morning on that day. This is actually taken from the deck of my house that at the time of the fire I didn't own it. I had sold it a few years previously, but looking down the street, and this next picture here, that's probably around 6:30. You can see that things are starting to burn. The sparks and embers have come into town. They've started to ignite anything that's combustible, particularly on the west end, the Cabin Creek subdivision. And it basically turned Cabin Creek into a war zone. It was just a structure-to-structure conflagration. Within 4 hours, Cabin Creek subdivision was gone. That's the aftermath. Not just Cabin Creek, but throughout the evening up until about 3 in the morning. As noted, there was a third of the town was destroyed, so quite a bit of the west side of town was non-existent. Fortunately, where I presently lived, my house was damaged but not destroyed, but the one across the street and the whole block below me was destroyed. And there didn't seem to be any real understanding or reason why some places burnt and some others, other than you could see, like Cabin Creek, for example, is a very dense subdivision with, some places you could almost reach out and shake your neighbor's hand through your kitchen windows because they're so close together. And they're all built with combustible materials. So that one kind of, you could understand it. But there was other areas where homes didn't burn or did burn that were kind of a mystery. Becker Chalets, on the other hand, was mostly spared, which is really another unusual one because I showed you the video of the fire. That was about 3 kilometers before. When it came through Becker's, it was on both sides of the highway, on both sides of the valley, and it was a full-on rank 6 fire. It was moving, marching into town. But Becker's had done a lot of fire-smart prep work. They had green grass everywhere. They had spaced their trees, limbed their trees, and they had sprinklers set up everywhere. So as you can see, the fire, and the river helped too. There's a nice dogleg in the river there that definitely helped them. But they did lose 3 buildings, but it could have been a lot worse because the next one up the line is Jasper House Bungalows. And the Whistler's Campground, totally wiped right off the map. There's nothing left of Jasper House Bungalows. Not one building remained. So 2/3 of the town was spared, and that's a win for me. I'm proud to say that because I didn't think anything would last. It was that bad. But the firefighters that were there, the crews that were there, did a tremendous job in saving the properties they could. And obviously Cabin Creek was not savable. There was Snow Mountain Village on the far west end that we had done a lot of protection around, plus it was stucco and metal and whatnot, so non-combustible. That was saved. But unfortunately, a lot of people ended up with a view like this. Even though their house did survive, they were looking at rubble and debris for quite a while. So the fire ended up destroying over 350 structures, but that equates to 820 housing units, and a lot of people don't think about that. That's 820 families or individuals or couples lost their housing units. And a lot of that is staff that feeds the town's hospitality industry. It also damaged 440 ATCO assets, and that also includes the ATCO office and the ATCO warehouse in the commercial area. So 1/3 of the town was burnt, but 2/3 was saved. So assessing the damage was ongoing for at least 10 months. It was considered, or is considered, the second most expensive disaster in Canada's history. It's upwards of $2 billion right now, and it's probably going to increase more. But just the magnitude of the destruction is just phenomenal, and just the damage assessment per property is just, again, mind-boggling. And then you're dealing with insurance and permitting and cleanup and all sorts of things. The big one that was people didn't expect was soil testing. All the lots that burnt had to have soil testing. It had to pass at a certain level, and nobody passed. In fact, most of them had to have it done 3 times, and each time they had it done, they'd have more debris or more soil removed, and then test it again. There's still a few that haven't passed. And there's some areas that can't be remediated because of special issues. And this is one area in the Cabin Creek subdivision where they built the houses into a hill. The problem was the retaining walls were damaged during the fire, and the hills are starting to come down. So these people aren't allowed to rebuild until they get the re-engineered retaining walls and whatnot. So this is going to be a while before they get going. In most cases, when we say 350 houses or whatever, it was complete destruction. There wasn't very many homes that actually just had a little bit of damage. Maybe a handful, but most homes that burnt were completely destroyed, and basically there was nothing left but ash and rubble. Nothing that was combustible was left. The only thing you'd see is bits of metal, and but people still held on to the hope that they could find something. I had numerous calls where I went and helped people remove safes out of their basement, and then we would get the safe to the fire hall and open it up, and it'd just be full of, well, you could tell it was paper, or you could tell it had been dollar bills or something, but as soon as you touched it, it just disintegrated. So really, the only people I know that really got any valuables were coins. And this leads to Team Rubicon. I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of Team Rubicon. It's a volunteer group consisting of military veterans and first responders, and they go to disaster sites all around the world. And they help out in any way they can. They're trained in heavy urban search and rescue, and they're trained in basically salvaging items from dangerous areas. So they assisted in Jasper, and they basically they'd come and they would be deployed to a property, and people would say where things should be, and they would sift through, and they have a process, and they would look for valuables. And in most cases they didn't uncover much, but what they did do is they provided a peace of mind to people and some closure, so they were really a huge boost to the morale of individuals that lost their properties. The other one was the Legion, which I mentioned I'm the president of Branch 31. The Legion stepped up, and we actually got to open early because we hosted Team Rubicon and got them in early. So before the people were allowed back to town, we actually had the Legion running, and we fed all the first responders for over a month, as well as housing Team Rubicon. And it wasn't just the Legion, it was the Red Cross and numerous other organizations and individuals that really stepped up and helped out. Jasper Park Lodge, that's where I was deployed during the event. This picture shows the golf course, and if you look kind of in the middle center, that's the actual lodge property. It's like a town of its own. There's 700 staff that work there. They've got well over 2,000 beds, multiple buildings. Some of them are extremely historic and extremely famous. The King and the Queen and anybody, the who's who of the world, have stayed at cabins at Jasper Park Lodge. And they had a long history of fire smart activities also, but despite that, they lost over 12 buildings. The golf course was destroyed, and it was a long time before they were able to get back on their feet. And very similar to Jasper, but on a smaller scale, I guess. And one of the things that really helped them was the fact of the layout of the golf course and the fact that we had the sprinkler system running. The irrigation was running 2 days before the event. It helped a lot. Plus, we had sprinklers set up pretty much everywhere we could get them. One thing a lot of people don't think about in these events is fridges and freezers. We had no power no solid power for 3 weeks straight, and then it was intermittent after that. But all the fridges and freezers were full, and they all lost power. They all started rotting, and it was pretty disgusting because I got called by numerous people to say, hey, can you go by my house and take the stuff out of my freezer? Well, that's not a very pleasant thing to do. But that was one of the biggest concerns. It also became an animal attracted too. We had issues with bears actually coming right into houses and getting into freezers and things. So something people don't think about. Another thing people don't think about is the power part of it. As I mentioned, we're with ATCO. And ATCO, within 16 construction days, had power restored to 100% of the properties that weren't damaged. So to me, that is mind-boggling, like how they did that. But how they did it, I was there. They brought in teams, individuals and teams from all over the province, and those people worked tirelessly. Amazing how they bonded together and they got the job done. Yeah, it was like almost 1,900 of the 2,070 or whatever customers were energized in less than 3 weeks. So to me, hats off to ATCO. I don't know if there's anybody here from ATCO, but thank you. So 98% of the undamaged properties in town, so like Lake Edith, which is a subdivision, Jasper Park Lodge, another subdivision, they had their gas services restored within 2 weeks. So it's amazing what ATCO did. This is one of the crews that was around, and I said they're from all over. Most of them didn't even know each other, but they really came together. Jasper did get a lot of damage, particularly obviously in Cabin Creek and the areas that were burnt, but also in the transmission lines on the south end of town. We have very narrow right-of-ways, particularly the older parts, because Parks Canada for years would not allow ATCO to put in a proper right-of-way. They had like a 3-meter clearance. When we came off our station and we came onto the grid in 2019, they ran transmission lines in, and even then, Parks didn't want them running along the side of the road like in a normal area. So now they're all snaking through the woods in the middle of nowhere, and they're hard to get to, and they're in thick bush. So that's one of the problems with the fire in 2022 was, you know, not just they got burnt over, but trees coming down on them and whatnot. And the same thing here. And some improvements were made and are being made. A lot of the fuses have been replaced with non-sparking devices. A lot of the poles now are protected with metal instead of the fire wrap, which proved not to be effective in a lot of areas. So from a bad thing has come some improvements. And this is our sewage treatment plant. And this is something most people don't think about. If you don't have a sewage treatment plant and you've got 25,000 tourists coming through a day, you cannot operate. And we saved it. I honestly think if we didn't, we wouldn't have Jasper right now. Nobody could live there. I mean, you can bring in potable water, you can bring in buildings and things like that, but you can't supply 25,000 people with porta potties. It's just, you know, that would be ridiculous. But it was saved through the hard work of the firefighters and sprinklers and the fire smart work that had been done. So to me, this was like the most critical piece of critical infrastructure. And you can see that it burnt around it, but it didn't burn at enough severity to do any damage. So I talked about the people, and in this case, this was a huge event. We ended up moving the Incident Command Post and the ECC to Hinton, which is 45 minutes away. And it was a unified command right from the beginning, mostly with Parks Canada and the municipality of Jasper. And we were using the incident command system. Along the way, we were joined by the Alberta Emergency Management Agency, Alberta Wildfire, Canadian Armed Forces, and a few others. Sorry, I keep getting little pop-up messages from whoever belongs to this computer. So this is just a picture of the ICP at some point. A lot of these people, well, most of the people actually turned out were from outside the community. And that's one thing in a municipality our size. They say you need to be 3 deep in your emergency group. It's kind of hard to do, to have 3 people that fit one role. You don't have enough people. So we rely on people from outside, and they rely on us in some cases. So even in an organization like a power company, like ATCO or something, it can be even hard for them to be able to field enough manpower in a big event. Okay. So we did have some challenges. Everything did go considerably well, considering the magnitude and the scope of the event. But there were lessons learned, and I think the most important thing is, you know, it's easy to evaluate or identify a problem or a challenge or somewhere where things didn't go maybe the way it should have, but the next thing is you need to act on it. And I'm happy to say that pretty much everything that was identified in the after action has been acted on or is being acted on in some shape or form. So if this ever happens again, God forbid, we'll be better prepared. But some of the things were just the staffing, the workload on the people was substantial, just long hours and just dealing with a lot of big issues and things piling up. So we had some issues with, kind of the quantity and quality of our staff because we were losing people. Personal impact was huge. You never thought about it, but a lot of the people that were in the ICP were residents that lost their homes and their families were displaced. So their mind, well, it's not really on the game all the time because they're thinking about other things that are, more important in a way because it's their families they're dealing with. So we lost people to having to go see their families and things like that. So having those extra resources and mutual aid was a big benefit. ICS is great, and it's a standardized command system that's designed so that people can come from all over and deal with an incident, and they're all on the same page, they're all speaking the same language. Problem with ICS is that some people change the language. They put some slang on it. I don't know, anybody here from Newfoundland? You heard a Newfoundlander talk. Well, they're speaking English, but it's got a bit of a Newfoundland slang to it. I married a Newfoundlander, so I can joke about it. ICS is the same. We ended up with people in the ICP and the ECC that they said they were trained in ICS. They had the certificate, but they're deviating a bit. So one thing I would stress is any organization, if you're using ICS, follow the program, follow the language, don't deviate. It makes things go so much better. It was a big impact to our small team, but thank you to all the people that came and helped. Like I said, everything went very well considering. So just in closing, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on Jasper, obviously just Reader's Digest version. But this could happen, maybe not a wildfire, but any kind of a major event can happen to any organization at any time. I think the key thing is to be prepared, obviously, but build those relationships early. Make sure the plans are in place early. Make sure everybody understands their role within the plan. When you are involving other agencies, plan together, work together. It's not the time to bring in ATCO and say, hey, by the way, you're going to take care of this part of the emergency when the emergency is happening. You need to pre-plan that. You need to practice it. Be reliable to your agency partners. Be respectful. And the biggest thing, just to get going, is sit down and have that conversation. Identify common goals. Come up with different scenarios. Then you can start coming up with the joint plans and conducting the joint exercises. At the end of the day, make sure you encourage feedback. That way you learn together and support each other throughout the year, not just throughout the event. And one thing that happened a few times is some people came into the ICP that basically thought they were going to run the show. Keep your ego out of it. That's really important. You need to deal with the incident on a professional, respectful level. There's no room for egos in an ICP or an ECC. Or in any organization, really. So with that, again, thank you very much for the privilege of speaking with you, and I do hope that you have a very fruitful, educational, wonderful time in Calgary, and Banff, to understand you're going to go to Grassy Lakes, which is a beautiful little hike. So thanks again, and we'll be around, I think, for the question and answer. So thanks very much.